They called her just a housewife. She called it survival. In 1965, with $7, 4 mouths, and a husband's paycheck already spoken for, Dorothy didn't panic, didn't borrow, didn't break. She opened a notebook and quietly built a system so effective her family never missed a meal, never begged a neighbor, never touched a credit line. For decades, nobody talked about it. Now, in 2026, with inflation swallowing paychecks whole and debt becoming America's most common dinner guest, people are finally asking the question her own children never thought to ask. How did she actually do it? Keep watching, because this changes everything. The kitchen light flickered every morning at 5:47. Dorothy never fixed it. Fixing things cost money they didn't have. She'd stand there in her faded blue housecoat, the one with the frayed cuff she'd sewn back 3 times already, holding a cup of coffee that was more hot water than grounds. The smell was thin, like the rest of everything that year. It was 1965. Gary was working double shifts at the plant. Good man, tired man, a man who came home with dirt under his fingernails and love in his eyes, and just enough in his paycheck to almost make it work. Almost. 2 kids, rent, a gas bill that seemed to grow bigger every time she opened the envelope, a refrigerator that hummed too loud and kept food just cold enough to pretend everything was fine. Dorothy was 31 years old, and she'd learned something most women her age never admitted out loud, that fear wore a very quiet face. It didn't scream. It just sat across from you at the dinner table, watching the children eat, counting every spoonful. She never let them see it. She'd smile, cut her own portion smaller without explanation, refill their glasses before they noticed she hadn't touched hers. That was the kind of woman she was. And that October, the month the heating bill arrived early and Gary's overtime got cut without warning, something shifted behind those steady eyes of hers. Not panic, not defeat, something quieter, something deliberate. She pulled out a plain composition notebook from the kitchen drawer and sat down alone after the children were asleep. How did she even begin? She didn't write a budget that night. Not exactly. What Dorothy wrote was something closer to a confession, numbers she'd been too afraid to line up side by side before. The rent, the gas, the groceries, Gary's take-home after taxes, the small loan payment they never talked about at dinner. When she added it all up, she sat very still for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed slowly outside. Somewhere down the hall, one of the kids turned over in their sleep. She didn't cry. She'd learned a long time ago that crying didn't change column totals. Instead, she drew a single vertical line down the center of the page. Left side, what came in. Right side, where it went. And then she did something that sounds almost too simple to matter. She crossed out every number on the right side that wasn't survival. Not luxury, not comfort, survival. The small indulgences disappeared with a single pen stroke. The occasional soda, the name-brand soap, the habit of buying bread already sliced. It didn't feel like discipline yet. It felt like grief. But underneath that grief was something she hadn't expected. A strange, quiet sense of control, like she'd finally stopped pretending the water wasn't rising and had actually decided to swim. She labeled the left margin with one word: enough. Not abundance, not wealth, just enough. Gary found her there past midnight, notebook open, pen still in hand. He looked at the page, then at her face. "You all right?" he asked softly. She nodded once, slowly. "Getting there," she said. He didn't ask more questions. He trusted that look. He always had. But the grocery store would test her resolve. Thursday was grocery day. Dorothy walked to Mercer's Market alone. No cart, just a canvas bag, a folded list, and exactly $11.40 in her coat pocket. She'd counted it twice before leaving the house. The store smelled like cold air and sawdust and something sweet near the bakery section. Under different circumstances, she might have slowed down there, let herself breathe it in, maybe bought a small thing wrapped in wax paper that the kids would have loved. Not today. She moved through the aisles with the quiet focus of someone defusing something dangerous, eyes scanning unit prices, not package sizes, hands reaching past the familiar labels toward the store brand sitting one shelf lower. Oats instead of cereal, dried beans instead of canned, a whole chicken instead of the pre-cut pieces that cost 40 cents more for the convenience of someone else's knife work. Every choice was a small negotiation. Her hand touched a jar of peanut butter, the good kind, the one Tommy always asked for by name. She held it for just a second, then set it back. The store brand went into the bag instead. 12 cents saved. She noted it mentally, without celebration. At the register, a neighbor, Carol Simmons, appeared beside her with a full cart and easy posture. "Dorothy, stocking up?" "Just the essentials," she smiled, warm, unbothered, perfectly composed. Inside, she was calculating whether dried lentils could stretch across 4 dinners. They could. She'd already done the math at midnight. She reached the register, laid everything out carefully, watched the numbers climb. $11.38. 2 cents under. She exhaled through her nose, barely. But groceries weren't the biggest threat. The utility bill arrived on a Friday. Dorothy saw the envelope on the mat before Gary did. She picked it up without rushing, carried it to the kitchen, set it face down on the counter while she poured his coffee, waited until he left for the plant. Then she opened it. The number inside was worse than last month, not dramatically, just enough, just that quiet, grinding kind of worse that doesn't shock you, it simply tightens everything by another degree. She stood there a moment, then folded it neatly and slid it behind the flour tin where she kept the important things nobody needed to panic about yet. That afternoon, she walked through every room differently, not as a mother, not as a wife, as an auditor. The bathroom light left on, the living room radiator cranked higher than necessary, the kitchen tap with its slow, persistent drip she'd been meaning to mention for weeks. Small things, invisible things, the kind of waste that doesn't feel like waste until you're standing in a kitchen doing desperate arithmetic. She fixed the tap herself with a washer from Gary's toolbox, turned the radiator down 2 degrees, started reminding the kids, gently, without alarm, to switch lights off when they left a room, made it a game, a point system. Tommy took it seriously in the way only 7-year-olds can. "I got 4 points today, Mama." "That's my boy," she said, and meant it completely. Nothing got replaced that month. The fraying dish towels, the cracked handle on the saucepan, the worn sole on her left shoe. Repair, reuse, endure. Not glamorous, not easy, but quietly, steadily effective. The real test came mid-month. It was a Tuesday when everything tilted. Tommy came home from school holding his arm against his chest in that careful way children do when they're trying not to cry in front of anyone. Dorothy saw it from the porch before he even reached the steps. She kept her face completely still. Inside, her stomach dropped straight through the floor. It wasn't broken, the doctor confirmed that much, just a bad sprain. Ice, rest, a follow-up if the swelling didn't settle. Simple enough in diagnosis. Not so simple in the envelope he handed her at the front desk with a polite, practiced smile. $4.70. She paid it without hesitation, without flinching, without letting Tommy see anything except a mother completely unbothered by the whole ordeal. "You were so brave," she told him on the walk home. He beamed, held her hand with his good arm. She smiled back and calculated silently behind her eyes the entire way home. $4.70 was a third of what remained in the household envelope until Gary's next payday. The envelope she'd already trimmed to the bone. The envelope that was supposed to cover the last 2 weeks of the month, including groceries, the gas meter, and a small payment she owed Mrs. Henderson next door from 2 months prior. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table after dinner. Kids in bed, Gary on the couch, already half asleep from the double shift. She opened the notebook, looked at the numbers, closed it again, sat in the quiet for a long moment with her hands flat on the table, breathing slowly, thinking without panic, feeling without surrendering to the feeling. That's when she made one decision nobody expected. She knocked on Ruth Haley's door at 9 the next morning. Ruth was 3 houses down, older, practical in the way that women who'd survived the 40s were practical, quietly, completely, without making a performance of it. Dorothy had a proposition, not a request, not charity, a proposition. "I'll trade you a full pot of vegetable soup every Thursday," Dorothy said, standing straight on the porch, "if you let me use your sewing machine twice a week." Ruth looked at her for a long moment, then stepped aside to let her in. That was how it started. Within 2 weeks, something quiet and extraordinary was happening on Calloway Street. Dorothy had mapped the hidden economy of her own neighborhood without anyone quite realizing it. Ruth got soup. Dorothy got access to a sewing machine that let her repair and alter clothes instead of replacing them. Margaret, 2 doors over, had a garden producing more zucchini than her family could eat. Dorothy offered to bake her bread twice a week using bulk flour she'd bought at a discount. Margaret handed over vegetables without a second thought. The Henderson boy needed arithmetic tutoring. Dorothy spent 40 minutes with him on Wednesdays. Mrs. Henderson quietly began leaving an extra quart of milk on their porch every few days. No discussion, no ledger, just neighbors, just people trading what they had for what they needed. Dorothy never once called it a system, never announced it, never made anyone feel the weight of it. She simply moved through her community the way water moves, finding every available path forward, quietly, persistently, without waste. The soup stretched further because the vegetables were free. The clothes lasted longer because the machine was borrowed. $11 went further than it had any right to. But pride nearly ruined everything. It was Margaret who said it first. Not unkindly, that was the thing. She said it the way neighbors say things, casually, over a fence, without understanding the weight of what lands. "You know, Dorothy, people are noticing how careful you've been lately, how managed everything looks." She meant it as a compliment. Dorothy smiled, thanked her, carried the zucchini inside. Then stood at the kitchen sink for a long moment staring at nothing. Managed. There was something about that word, something that sat sideways in her chest. She knew what careful looked like from the outside, patched elbows, store-brand everything, a woman who never ordered anything extra, never lingered near the things she couldn't afford. She knew people could see it. and for 3 days after that conversation, she stopped. Stopped knocking on Ruth's door, stopped the bread arrangement with Margaret, stopped accepting the quiet milk deliveries from Mrs. Henderson. She told herself it was fine, that she'd figure something else out, that her family didn't need anyone's involvement, implied or otherwise. Gary noticed the soup was thinner, didn't say anything, just noticed. Tommy asked why they hadn't had Mrs. Haley's sewing projects spread across the living room lately. Just a break, Dorothy said lightly. But the numbers in the notebook didn't take breaks. By the 3rd day, she was short, not dramatically, but enough. That specific, suffocating kind of enough that sits on your chest at 2 a.m. when the house is silent. She lay in the dark next to Gary's slow breathing and had a quiet, honest conversation with herself. Pride didn't feed anyone. Dignity wasn't the same thing as isolation. She knocked on Ruth's door again the next morning. Ruth opened it without surprise. "Soup Thursday?" Ruth asked simply. "Soup Thursday," Dorothy said. Now only 7 days remained. 7 days. Dorothy wrote the number at the top of a fresh page, like a countdown, because that's exactly what it was. Below it, she listed everything that remained, not just money, everything. The half bag of oats, the dried beans she'd rationed across the month, 3 eggs, a heel of bread, canned tomatoes from the back of the pantry she'd nearly forgotten about, a small piece of salt pork wrapped in paper in the icebox. She looked at it all for a long time. Then she began to build. Not meals, a sequence, a precise interlocking sequence where nothing was wasted and everything fed into the next thing. The salt pork bones would go into a broth. The broth would stretch the beans. The beans would carry Tuesday and Wednesday. The oats would handle every breakfast without exception. The canned tomatoes would become a sauce, simple enough to dress anything. She wrote it all out in her small, careful handwriting, columns, portions, contingencies. It looked less like a meal plan and more like architecture. Candle burning low on the table beside her, house completely silent, children sleeping, Gary's work boots still damp by the door from the evening rain. She worked until the candle had melted another inch. Every remaining dollar had a name, every coin had a destination, nothing floated, nothing was approximate. 40 cents for the gas meter top-up, 60 cents held back for absolute emergency only. The last day of October arrived the way quiet things always do, without announcement. Dorothy woke before the alarm, lay still for a moment, listening to the house breathe around her. Gary's steady presence beside her, the distant sound of Tommy shifting in his bed down the hall, the familiar flicker of the kitchen light she could somehow hear even from the bedroom. She already knew. She'd known since the night before, when she'd counted everything remaining on the kitchen table with both hands flat and steady, no trembling, no holding of breath. The numbers had held. Not perfectly, not with any cushion worth celebrating, but they had held in the way that a carefully built thing holds, through intention, through discipline, through 100 small decisions that nobody outside those 4 walls would ever fully see or understand. She made breakfast without ceremony, oats, thin but warm. The kids ate without complaint because they didn't know there was anything to complain about. That had been the quiet miracle of the whole month. They had never once felt the thinness of it. Gary sat across from her with his coffee. He looked at her the way he sometimes did, that long, unhurried look that didn't require explanation. "Good month?" he asked, quietly. She considered the question honestly. The doctor's bill, the utility spike, the 3 days she'd let pride cost her more than money, the midnight candle, the soup arrangements, the notebook filled with small, careful numbers that had somehow added up to survival. "Yeah," she said simply, "good month." She cleared the plates, washed them slowly, watched the pale November light come through the window above the sink. No fanfare, no revelation, just a woman who had decided quietly that enough was achievable and had proven herself right. Dorothy's story didn't make the newspapers. Nobody interviewed her, nobody studied her methods, or photographed her notebook, or turned her kitchen table into a case study. She was just a woman on Calloway Street who figured something out quietly and kept her family standing when everything around them was designed to make that harder. But here's what's strange. What she understood instinctively in 1965 with a composition notebook and $11 and a candle burning low is something millions of people in 2026 are desperately searching for and cannot seem to find. Because the world got louder, the spending traps got smarter, the one-click purchase replaced the deliberate walk to the store, the subscription charge replaced the conscious decision. The algorithm learned exactly which moment you were tired or stressed or lonely enough to spend money you hadn't planned to spend. Convenience became the most expensive thing we ever bought. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, the simple, disciplined art of knowing exactly where every dollar sleeps at night quietly disappeared. Dorothy never confused wants with needs, not because she was extraordinary, but because she couldn't afford to. And in not being able to afford that confusion, she accidentally built something most modern households desperately lack: clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't come from a budgeting app, or a financial influencer, or a viral spreadsheet template. It comes from sitting down in the quiet, telling yourself the truth, drawing a line down the center of a page, and being honest about both sides. It comes from understanding that dignity isn't found in what you buy. It's found in what you choose not to. Dorothy lived the rest of her life without significant debt, not because life got easier, but because she never forgot what October taught her: that enough, real, intentional, protected enough, is always worth fighting for, even when nobody's watching, even when the kitchen light flickers, even when everything feels like too much and the month feels impossibly long. She figured it out with a pen and a notebook and the quiet, stubborn belief that her family deserved stability more than they needed comfort. So do yours. Start tonight. One page, one honest list, one line down the center. Dorothy would recognize exactly what you're doing, and she'd tell you that's how it begins. They called her just a housewife. She called it survival. In 1965, with $7, 4 mouths, and a husband's paycheck already spoken for, Dorothy didn't panic, didn't borrow, didn't break. She opened a notebook and quietly built a system so effective her family never missed a meal, never begged a neighbor, never touched a credit line. For decades, nobody talked about it. Now, in 2026, with inflation swallowing paychecks whole and debt becoming America's most common dinner guest, people are finally asking the question her own children never thought to ask. How did she actually do it? Keep watching, because this changes everything.